Hello, and welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor YouTube live stream. I just happened to be holding my camera today, so I wanted to welcome all of you. If you are new to the channel, I do this every week at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time right here. So if you are new, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like this video so that you get notices next time I am going live. Today, I'm going to talk about photo editing and specifically how to do tone control and fix perspective and distortion. So I have a few example images that have been submitted by subscribers, and you can send in your images for me to edit next week or a future week just by using the form right below the video. If you are watching this on Facebook, you'll need to head over to YouTube, but I'll edit the video later so that you have a link to submit your images if you want to from there. If you are part of a camera club, we have an extra special thing for you. I'll mention a bit more about that later. So we've got a few people wandering in. I can see a few already from Australia, always representing Linton and Ron from Australia. They're almost always here, especially at the new time. We've got Marguerite from Ontario. And as always, Rob is here to help moderate and make sure that I find all of your questions. So if you do have any questions, please type it into the chat and we'll make sure to get to the question as we go along. Welcome, Nancy. So let me share my screen, right? And everybody should be able to see that now. And I'm just going to put this at the bottom here. So if you do want to submit your images, remember to go to the link below the video description on the YouTube channel. All right, so without further ado, I want to get started, and I've got this image up on the screen because I've already done a little bit of editing to it. So I want to show you the before and after. All right, so this is an image that was taken by Regan. She's one of my tutoring students. I've done many sessions with her, and that's something that I offer as well. If you need a little bit extra help, I do offer private lessons. So this was the original image that she sent me, and it is a JPEG, so I'm a little bit limited on what I can do with it. But what I wanted to do was to bring out the wishbone, as she's titled this image, or these particular little bricks here. Let me turn on my mouse pointer so you can see what I'm pointing at here. There we go. All right, so we're looking at these two sort of branches or pieces of aged wood sticking out of the ground, and she felt it looked like a wishbone. So the original image was really backlit, and the bone was almost, or these pieces of wood, I keep wanting to call it a bone, was sort of lost in this because the background is really bright. So I'm going to show you what the image looks like. Let me just go full screen here for a minute. I want to show you a little trick. So I wrote about composition tips last week. Rob, if you could please share in the chat the link to the article I did last week on 7 composition tips, and also how to improve your background, because this is applies to both of these here. So one of my trick is to look at the image upside down. Right? So when you do that and you look at the image upside down, you'll see the tones that are going to catch your attention. So take a look at this now that I've flipped it upside down. Your eye goes to these areas here, especially because of two things. There's a lot of contrast between the lights and the darks, and there's lots of bright areas. So those are things that will catch your attention in the background. Okay, so you don't want those things grabbing attention. You want the eye to go towards the wood. So I've done some things with some local adjustments. Let me turn it right side back up again. I've done some things with some local adjustments, and I'm working here in Lightroom Classic. Okay, so if you are using another program, you'll have similar tools. I'm going to probably demonstrate Luminar AI at some point today as well, right? If you want to see me, we'll put myself back on here. So I work with 2 monitors. So I'm working with a monitor over here, so you'll often see me looking this way, all right? And what I'm going to show you is on this image what I did to adjust it. So going into the develop module, let's turn on my panels here. you can see that I did some basic adjustments in here in terms of highlights and shadows, but I also did more local adjustments. Okay, so the difference is these sliders in your basic panel or on any of these tools apply to the entire image. When you're dealing with a local adjustment, specifically one you want to darken bright areas or lighten dark areas, you're going to need to use some local adjustments. So that's the tools that are located up here. Okay, so there's a graduated filter, the radial filter, and the brush. In this case, I used the radial filter, and I applied one to the background here. And then I actually painted it in so that it covered the corners and it didn't cover the wood, right? And you can do that by going into the brush tool here, which is part of this radial filter, and you can brush things in and out. Okay, so if I want to erase a little bit more, I'll just do an example here. Oops, that's painting in. I got to click erase to erase. Okay, so if I want to take it off of these little things in the foreground here, I can just erase it, okay, like so. And I've turned the mask on in Lightroom, which is O on the keyboard. So if you press O, this little colored overlay shows where this tool is applying, okay? Then I also applied a couple of other radial filters to the actual pieces of wood themselves. And here I did an increase of exposure, and I did an increase of texture and dehaze. So the reason that I did that was if I turn these filters off, you'll see what the original was. Okay, so I'm doing that tone control to darken the background while simultaneously lightening these two pieces of wood. Okay. The other thing that I did was I did a fair bit of cloning. Now you wouldn't think of using the cloning and heal tool, that's this guy up here, to remove things in the, like tone control, but I use it quite often to do exactly that. So let me just turn off this tool and you can see what I've done. So there's this strip here in the background of really bright light and the brightest bits on, which is catching these tops of these plants. So I used this to tone things down. Okay, so I created this one here. Now I did use this one at 100%. Let me look at this one, for example. Okay, so I created a little painted area here on the bush, but I'm only using it at 25% healing. Okay, if I turn it up, you'll see that it will actually, excuse me, try to remove that bush. Okay, so I just want to tone it down. And I use that often if I'm doing things on portraits to remove dark circles under eyes and things like that. I'll use this tool at, say, 30% opacity. All right, let me just go over here. So as Rob is reminding me, and somebody else who is joining on Facebook, if you are watching on Facebook, please remember to give permissions to StreamYard. That's the software that I'm using to broadcast, and then you'll be able to link it with your Facebook profile so I know who's commenting from Facebook. And as Rob reminded me, I forgot to show you our little intro commercial, so I'll just run that real quick for you. So in case you weren't sure whose channel you were watching, that's Digital Photo Mentor, which is me, myself. All right, so let me continue here. Okay. Do you have any questions about the tone control that I've done so far on this image? Okay, I could take it a little bit farther. The other thing that I did was I adjusted the whites and the blacks, and I have an entire video on using the basic panel in Lightroom. So if you could please share that for me, Rob. It goes over all of these tools and how I use the whites and the black sliders to set what's called the endpoints so that I have maximum contrast without losing detail. Okay, just like that. So I'm using the Alt Option key to have the clippings show up while I'm using these sliders, and that's a really handy way of getting that precise, right? So once again, before and after, okay? So I've punched up the overall contrast of the entire image, okay, while toning down the contrast in the background at the same time. Now, there's an interesting phenomenon that's happening here. I see sort of almost some streaks coming from this top left corner, almost like there's some sun coming through and hitting these plants. So I kind of want to go take this into Luminar, right? So Luminar can be used as a standalone or plugin for Lightroom or Photoshop or Mac Photos program as well. Article for that, Rob, is the Lightroom basic sliders article and video, please, Rob. Right. So if I want to use Luminar as a plugin to invoke that in Luminar Lightroom is a tongue twister. Okay. To invoke that in Lightroom, to go to Luminar, I just right click and then choose Luminar AI. If I want to open the original image directly, as in the raw file, I will choose export instead and open source file. So then I would open the original version of this image. But I want to edit what I've already continue where I've left off here. So I want to edit a version with the Lightroom edits already done. Okay, so I want to edit a copy. So now it will make a copy of this image and open it inside of Luminar. So this is what's called non-destructive editing, in terms of the original image is not ever going to be touched. So I don't have to worry about writing over it or making a mistake that I can't undo later. And where's my Lightroom and my Luminar? If you're joining us for the first time and you're new here, please tell me where you are joining from. And I'd love to know what time it is where you are. I know it's probably early morning in Australia. And I've got my Luminar open. Okay, so there's one particular tool that I want to head right to when I get inside of Luminar, and that is the sun rays. Okay? Because I think this is sun coming in from this corner, I'm actually going to play that up. So the first thing I need to do is create the sun rays, and then I'm going to place the center. So I'm going to place it off the screen, like it's coming from that same direction. So if I want to go from about there, okay. And I'm just going to turn it off so I can see. Nope, it's further to the left. Okay, so let's try that again. So it's coming from more about over here. Let's see if that matches better. Okay, so I'm just toggling that off to make sure that I get the angle of the rays right. Okay, that's pretty close. It's probably a little bit further up. And then I can play with things like the warmth of the rays and so on. The one that I use the most often is randomize. And what that does is it sort of just rotates through, and I want to try and get one where it looks like it's hitting either this little plant here or highlighting this log and this tree in the foreground. I can change the number of sun rays. Let's see, that occurs and shifts them as well. So I just kind of keep going until I find something that works for this image. Okay, that's not bad. It's sort of coming across the top here. Maybe I want a few more rays. Okay, I like what that's doing. Okay, so see how now it's aiming at the wood, right? I can reduce a bit of glow a little bit. Maybe I even want to have this just ever so slightly off to the side here. And I'm probably going to lower the strength a little bit, right? Just so that it's subtle. Overall look allows me to create something dark or light. Let's do that about like so. So see how that just adds to that feeling of the light coming from that direction, right? I could also go down into one tool that I use a lot in the Pro section of Luminar AI, and that is super contrast, right? Because these highlights are still sort of bothering me, I want to darken them, and super contrast is good at doing that, right? So the first thing I do is bring it up, this contrast slider up to the middle, and then you'll notice that by changing the balance, I can darken the highlights or lighten them. So I know I want to darken, and then I'm just going to bring this back a little bit. Okay? So just see what that's doing by toggling it off. So it's really affecting those highlights. And then I want to add a little bit more contrast into the midtones, which should affect my logs nicely. And in this case, I think I want to lighten a little bit. Not quite so much. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of contrast in the shadows. Again, you can lighten or darken. So I'm going to darken in this case. So let's see what this one is doing. Giving me a nice glow on the yellows, which is now telling me, because I've got a lot of yellow in here, that I can also use the color tools in the HSL panel. So that's under color, to adjust the brightness of these tones here. Now I can do the similar kind of thing or the same thing inside of Lightroom, but the difference is I can't mask it. Okay, so if I want to apply this here, let's just take the yellow and the orange down quite far. Okay, so I'm taking the luminance down, and I'm still not getting those bushes. Let's see. Okay, that looks good. And I may bring the saturation down a little bit as well. And the cool thing about this is that I can mask it. Okay, so if I only want it to apply to the background and not the foreground, I can do a paint mask. I can do a radial mask. So I'm just going to drag it in like so. So it's applying to that background and not as much to the foreground. Okay. So now let's see our before and after. So we've got some nice sun rays coming in. And I might just dodge and burn on this a little bit. If you've used the dodge and burn tool, this is again going to be similar to using an adjustment brush in Lightroom. Make sure your strength is down under 15 and use a little bit smaller brush and paint it in gradually. Okay, so you don't want to paint with, say, 50 or 80 or 100%, because this is what happens. Okay, you get an obvious streak, and you don't want to do that. You want to use it really low. I'm using 11%, and then I'm just literally going in here and lightening up bits of the wood. Right, you can get really precise. Right, I could even say, okay, I want to lighten up this grass here a little bit in the foreground. And this allows you to do some really, really targeted lightening and darkening. Right? Now I can do the same to darken. If I want to darken these strips a little bit more, or maybe over here, just to add a bit more contrast. Okay. Let's see what that's doing. The other cool thing about the dodge and burn tool is that you can actually dial it down. Okay, again, not something you can do in Lightroom. So if you've used the adjustment brush in Lightroom and you're not happy with it, you have to just go open it again and edit it or rebrush. Whereas with the dodge and burn tool, you can literally just say, oh, I went too far. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. All right, so you can see what it's doing is I'm really shifting this tone control. Okay, maybe I want to darken this little bush even more. Okay. Like that. Another one that I use a lot is the details panel. And this one allows me to adjust the details for small, medium, and large details. It's similar to using clarity or texture in Lightroom, but again, I can mask it, right? Which you could do with an adjustment brush in Lightroom. And I can also apply it differently to different details. Okay, so large details are things which are more smooth. So you can see that if I crank up the large details versus down, okay, it's changing the grass in the background. Okay, so I want to actually bring that down and then bring the sharpen up a little bit. Okay, like so. And finally, if I wanted to create something more dramatic, I might try some mood, which is a lot, or dramatic. But we're talking about mostly tone control, so I'm going to leave it there for today. Okay. So everything I'm doing to this image, is to bring the attention to the subject, which is those two pieces of wood. And I think more so the one on the left than the one on the right. Hey, Bruce, nice to see you. Yes, Bruce used to be a writer on Digital Photography School when I was the editor there. Good to hear from you. Awesome. Yes, dodge and burn is lighten and darken. So those are actually old terms from the days of darkroom work. So dodging meant lightening and burning meant darkening. Okay, so those are kind of confusing terms, but Luminar makes it easy to understand because the tabs actually say lighten and darken. So the tool itself is called dodge and burn, but it tells you right simply there with the tabs, do you want to lighten or do you want to darken? All right, let's take a look at another image. So I promised I would do this one last week. This is from Kai Vu, and I promise I apologize in advance if I'm murdering your name or pronunciation. So if you are joining in, as I promised last week, here is your image. I did receive it. So I'd love to know where this is taken. It looks really similar to something I saw in Vietnam. So I'd love to know if that is actually the case. You can see that they shot this image at 3/20th of a second, f8, ISO 200 with an 80mm lens. And I can tell you that it was shot with a Nikon because it's an NEF file. But also, yes, right there, Nikon 750. Okay, so when I ask for your images to be submitted, ideally it's great if you can send me the raw file like this, because number one, it's unedited and it's full size. And number two, I have all your camera information so I can actually see what's happening under the hood, and it gives me more flexibility with editing as well. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with this one, and I've talked about this in previous videos as well, is to choose the camera profile. Right, so you can find that in Lightroom right up here. It's this little 4 squares, and you'll see if Lightroom recognizes your camera, you'll see it here where it says camera matching, okay? If there isn't anything there, it's possible that you just need to download the profiles for your camera and install it into Lightroom, okay? So this one is chosen, they've chosen flat, or possibly that's likely the profile they used in the camera when they shot this, right? But just by hovering your mouse over some of the others, you can see that it really changes the entire look of the image, right? Including some monochromatic ones, just by changing the camera profile, right? So the difference between flat and landscape, right? Look at how much punchier it is. Greens are standing out a lot more. Okay, that little hut or house is really coming out of the fog. So it also depends on the look that you want. Okay, so if you want to enhance the fog and make it look more foggy, go with the flat. If you want to bring out a little bit of punch, start with the landscape, okay, or something that gives it a little bit more spark. So even standard gives me a little more punch. Neutral's just that, neutral. So I'm going to go with standard in this case. I found that landscape is a little bit too much contrast, right? The next thing I want to look at are the highlights and the shadows, or the whites and the blacks, right? You can turn on your clipping warning by hitting the J key on the keyboard. Please provide a link to the article I have on Lightroom keyboard shortcuts, and there's a free PDF there you can download as well if you use Lightroom. So J on the keyboard shows you the areas that are clipping. So what that means is anything that is off the graph. And you can see here on the histogram, there's a big spike on the right, which is the highlights or the white side. And you can see that the sky is indeed clipping, which means there's no detail there. Okay, so that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If I pull the highlights down, I can definitely keep the detail there. You can see now there's nothing clipping. It hasn't really changed the sky all that much, other than I've picked up a little bit of detail sort of at the top of the hill, right? So no matter what I do, I'm not going to get that sky back. I don't think there's anything there, right? Even if I drag it all the way down, you can see it's pretty foggy and hazy. So there might be a little bit of cloud, but really not much to recover, right? So this might be a case of, if you want the sky to show, then we'll bring it over to Luminar and do a sky replacement, right? So what I just did there was I hit Alt Option and drag the black slider down until I got a little bit of clipping, okay? This is kind of my old version or my way of doing dehaze, right? So I've done the highlights down and the blacks down, but let me just reset both of those. Okay, but dehaze slider in Lightroom is built to kind of do the same thing. Okay, you see that it's darkening the blacks and it's punching up the contrast, okay? But I find that it doesn't allow you the control as to where you're adding the contrast, okay? It is pulling it towards the left on the histogram, okay? So that looks pretty good. And I might use a combination of this slider and the highlight slider. You can still see I'm still clipping, okay? So when I'm holding that Alt Option key down, I can actually visualize what's clipping, okay, until it's gone. And then let's do a little more black. So blacks, I want to clip, whites, I don't, okay? So let's look at the before. So just by changing the camera profile and some basic edits, we've already done some tone control to really bring out the details in this little hut here, okay? I could also bring the shadows up a little bit. So keep in mind that if you bring the shadows up and you want it to apply in the house, it's going to come up everywhere. So again, this is where I use a lot of these local adjustment tools. Okay, so I'm going to draw a radial filter. That's the one I'm used here. So click and drag, and then just double click the word effect to reset it. And then I'm going to increase the shadows and the exposure. Okay, so exposure actually applies to the mid-tones of the image, right? See what I do there? Is it really bringing up that part of the house? I might rotate that a little bit to get a bit more of that dark area, like so. Okay. So I'm bringing out the detail inside that house, okay? Now, if I don't want it to apply to the lighter areas, I can also use a range mask. So this is something that Lightroom added a few versions ago, and it's really handy. So I'm choosing the luminance range mask, check off the box to show it. And what happens is you get this little range slider here, okay? So the left is highlights, just like the histogram, and the right is the left is blacks, right is highlights, just like your histogram. So if I pull this away from the left, it starts to remove it. Can you see this now? This masking part, it's not affecting the brightest parts, okay? So if I only want to brighten the areas that are dark and I want to leave this rock face alone, okay, see what that's doing? But if I put this back up, it's affecting the light areas as well. So you can really control how you affect these tones here with this mask, okay, the luminance mask. So that's a great one to use. Okay, so ideally, I'd love to have something coming down the road here. And he actually actually had another image with a motorcyclist. So if I wanted to get into really complex editing, I could copy and paste the motorcyclist from one image to another. Okay, but I want to stick to keeping up with our theme today, which is tone control. I find that the image is leaning a little bit as well. I want to see if I can autocorrect using the crop tool. Okay, so clicking autocorrect. So it did sort of tilt it a little bit. I'm just going to visually take a look at, okay, where are I'm looking at the trees in particular, right? Especially the ones growing out over here beside the house. So I'm looking for, are the trees straight? Because generally, unless they're sort of being blown a lot, trees are going to grow straight up and down. So I'm going to try that for cropping. Right, so it doesn't look like the path is now crooked, but it's probably on a lean a little bit. Okay, maybe I'll come back just a tiny little bit, like so. Okay, like that. Now let's deal with that sky. So we've gotten rid of the clipping, but we still have super white sky. Okay, if I go any further with dehaze, okay, I will pick up this stuff up here, okay, but it's not doing, I don't like what it's doing there, and it's kind of making a halo. Okay, so you have to be careful whenever you're doing editing that you don't go too far. So let me show you what too far looks like, because that's a question that I get a lot. So I'm going to use a graduated filter and pull it down from the top. because I want to darken that sky and those highlights again. So I'm just going to pull this down to show you what too far looks like. Okay. So now you can see that I've got a really specific line here where I'm darkening. Okay. So hopefully you can see that you don't want to do something like that because you've got this solid line. Okay, if I turn that off, you can see where the vignette is. Okay. So you don't want to do that. Right. So too much is when you've pulled things too far and you can start to see a vignette, or you can see your editing. So in this case, if I wanted to make it a little more natural, I can use the masking again. And this time I want it to not apply to the dark areas or the hill. So I'm just going to keep pulling it up from the left until the red only is in the sky. Okay? And I want it to be a little bit more faded. Okay? So let's see how that is. I think that's as far as I can go. Okay? So that's not too bad. Let's just scale that back a little bit. I might add a little bit of clarity. Now you can start to see again, it's still affecting things in the woods here, in the trees, and I can't do any more of this masking. So I'd have to go in and do it manually because the tones are too similar. So you really have to be careful how far you go so that you don't take it too far and look obvious. What you want to do with your photo editing is you want it to look like the image has attention to the subject, but you don't want to call attention to your actual editing. So I will spread this out a little bit, which actually then gradates it more. Okay, so I'll show you again. Okay, so if I go really dark, you can see that this gradation makes it softer. Okay, versus closer together, you see more hard edge. Okay, so you want to have your graduated tool with a softer edge most of the time. So now we still have a sense of that it's hazy and smoky. We got a little bit of cloud in the sky, and we've got more detail in this building here, right? This little house. And you notice that if I take dehaze up higher, the sky brings out more detail, but then I'm losing detail in the house. Okay, so if I do that, then I need to go back to my radial filter and bring up the shadows a little bit more, or maybe the exposure. Okay, so it's a dance again between one setting and another. Okay? Do one adjustment, see how it applies, and then go back and adjust any others that need to be adjusted. I'm going to do another graduated filter up from the bottom corner here, and I'll do this a lot to sort of add a vignette if I want it off-centered or just applying to this edge. So I want it to darken coming in from this left corner because I want to affect this path, okay? So I want to do that so that your eye goes, again, more towards the house. Okay, how are we doing? Still feels foggy, but the house is not lost, right? Do you have any questions about that one? Now I can pull this one into Luminar, and if I'm going to do that with a sky replacement, which I can do, I'm actually going to turn this filter off. Right? So I'm going to correct it. I want it actually to be, let's just delete that one. I want the sky to be white because it'll be easier to be replaced. All right. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the last one. I'm going to right click, choose Edit in, Luminar AI, and I want to make sure I use edit a copy. Okay. Generally, you want to use a TIFF as your, your image format. I'm using JPEG just for the ease and speed of my computer. Linton says, he likes the mystery of the misty image. The sky is part of that, but there's too much sky, so he would have cropped it off a little bit from the top, leaving a small amount of sky. Well, let's try both, Linton. I'm going to do a quick sky replacement and see if I can find a sky that looks good, that works with this one, maybe even something stormy. And then we'll compare it to the misty version and see which we like. How about that? All right, so I've got it open here inside of Luminar. And I'm going to head directly to the sky replacement tool, which is under Creative. And after the last update 3 or the previous one, you can now see the skies. Okay, so I'm going to choose one that's appropriate. So you don't want to choose one like this that has the sun in it, because we know that that's not going to fit with the image. So I'm going to choose something that's got a lot of clouds and see how it fits in. Okay, that one's got too much blue sky. Let's try this one. I actually think some of these might have been taken in Vietnam, Linton. Okay, so that one's kind of cloudy. Not quite so much. Let's try this one. If I don't have any in my set, I'm going to go to stormy clouds and see. Okay, that would be very dramatic. We could play with that, but let's see what happens if I choose a stormy one. Okay, so there's a few stormy ones in the Luminar Marketplace. Rob, if you could share a link, please, to Luminar Marketplace with our link. So this one looks really dramatic in terms of it's got some lightning and so on. Right? Sometimes you really have to look for the right images to use in the sky. There's one in particular that I'm looking for, and I can't remember which set it's in, so I'm just browsing here. Starry Night, Burst of Drama. Okay, now he's got some in here. I'm going to go with one of these stormy ones. Okay, let's try this one. Because it also kind of does look like it might rain any minute in this image. Okay, so now we've got some stormy clouds. And I'm going to shift this one a little bit down. Blend it a little bit more. And I'm going to brighten it and increase the atmospheric haze. Okay, so the atmospheric haze will give me back that sort of misty feeling, right? Like so. So it feels like it's stormy. Maybe we need the lightning hitting over here. Let's try that. And we can also shift it. So it's hitting right in the valley here, or we can shift it so that it goes off the page, right? Actually, that's not too bad right there. We've got a hint of lightning, right? But it's really sort of affecting the color of the sky. Let's try our relight. So relight strength and saturation will allow the image below to match the tonality of the sky being added, right? So that's good. And we can enhance that even further with the Sky Enhance. Okay. Let's try Accent AI as well. Okay, so that's brightening up the whole thing. Like so. So that is one way of going about this one. Okay? There's also Atmosphere AI is part of Luminar, and you can add more fog. Okay? So if I didn't have enough fog to begin with, I can add some more. And I can control where it goes in terms of density and brightness and layered, because the program, the AI, is doing a really good job of analyzing the image and figuring out, okay, what's in the foreground. See how it creeps over the hill like that? Okay, so I'm just going to lower that a little bit to keep our fog. Okay, now it looks kind of rainy, right? So here's our before and after. So I'm keeping that integrity of that foggy sort of misty feeling. And I am going to add a mood one on this because I think it's going to work well. So mood is applying a LUT. And one of my favorite ones are these ones at the bottom here, wooden. So it kind of gives me like this brown ancient look, which I think works really well with this image because it's got this old sort of looking house here. And let's just give it a little bit. See what that's doing. I like it. Might even go with a matte look as well and fade that out. Okay, so now we're adding some stylized things and really changing the overall look of the image, right? Let's just keep this one here like that. All right. So it's kind of almost become black and white now. Let's go a little bit less. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to apply it and hop back over to Lightroom. All right, so some of the things that I do in Luminar are about tone control and things that I can't do with Lightroom, such as a sky replacement. Yes, you can do a sky replacement with Photoshop, but I've actually tested the two, Luminar AI and Photoshop, side by side, and I actually found that Luminar did a better job with sky replacement, and especially in areas where there's water, because Photoshop does not currently have a reflection feature, and also in areas where the sky might be segmented, such as looking through a window or something like that. Photoshop didn't find those bits of window, right? So Ron says he would like a tutorial on clipping. Okay, duly noted. I'll see what I can do. Marguerite asks, when doing a sky replacement in Luminar AI, does the sky have to be a JPEG or can you use a raw file? No, you do need to have a JPEG. And if you want to add your own skies, you can certainly do that. Rob, if you want to share a link to the video on sky replacements, then I demonstrate how to add your own in that video, I believe, Marguerite, so you can watch that, right? And now with the visual previews, you can actually put your entire set of skies that you've created yourself in a folder for custom skies, and it will show up as one of the pull down on that menu that I had. Okay. All right, ready for this example, Linton? Let's do the comparison here. Okay, so if we go back to the Lightroom version, and I'm going to scale it back because you said you liked the original sort of foggy image, so let's stick with that, right? So there's the foggy image. If anything, I might just warm it up a tad. That's better. And then let's compare to this one. I'm going to warm that up a little bit too. And let's look at them side by side. Okay, so Linton, anybody else? What do you think? Let's vote. So who likes the left image? Type left or right in the chat and let me know which version you prefer. Okay, neither is right or wrong. Okay, it's all about preference and your personal taste. Okay, so Linton saw something in the image and he wanted to enhance the mist. I saw something and I wanted to make it more dramatic, like it was raining or stormy, and came up with something very different. Okay, so Bruce likes the left image. Thanks, Bruce. I really just was playing around with that. Right, you wanted the sky crops. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Crop some of the sky off. Okay. Oops, let's just keep that. Coming down about like so. How's that, Linton? How's that? Okay, so we've got a couple voting for left. Nancy, Ron, Bruce all prefer the left one. Okay, so again, neither is right or wrong, and it's all about, you know, what you want to do if it's your image. Okay, the beautiful thing about doing things in Lightroom is that you can make a copy like this. Sorry, I got a tickle in my throat, guys. You can make a copy like this and try different things. Okay, so you can actually end up with multiple versions of the same image. This one might also look really good in pure black and white. Okay, so I could actually take the one that was done here, and the next image I'm going to show you is actually a black and white conversion. Okay, so I could actually convert this to black and white and play with the tones a little bit more. Right, so let's take a look at them compared in black and white. Okay, now which do you prefer? So if we look at them side by side, converted to monochromatic, I would probably punch up the contrast in both of them a little bit. Okay, but I do find the sky, especially that sky that I managed to find to replace here, it almost mirrors the shape of that hill right here. So it looks like it works really well together, like the storm's coming over the hill. All right. Let's undo that and get to a black and white one. Okay, so I promised I was going to do Chris's this week, but I want to show a couple of black and whites. Right, and I'm going to start with this one. Right, so I want to show you the original image, and then I'm going to undo it. Okay, so the original image is color. So if you are shooting in the monochrome mode on your camera, but you are shooting raw, so this is a raw file. Okay, let me just put up the data here. Again, a Nikon shot, so NEF file. So if you are shooting Nikon, Canon, Olympus, Fuji, Pentax, doesn't matter. As long as you are shooting raw and you switch to your monochrome or one of your monochrome modes or picture styles on your camera, your image will show black and white on the back of the screen, but then it will actually give you the color image like this in your photo editing software to work with it. Okay. The big difference is that when you start with a JPEG that's already converted to black and white, you don't have the color information to alter the tones. Okay. So let me show you the difference, right? You think he's frowning, Rob? He thinks the owl is frowning. I don't know. Oh, I guess maybe at the bottom. I thought that was his feet, actually. So his mouth is up here. His beak is here. I thought that was his feet. So let's convert this to black and white, right? So there's a couple of different ways that you can do black and white conversion. And again, we're going to talk about tone control, right? So you can simply, oops, let me just reset this image, get back in here. And I'm going to choose color. Okay, so in the original image in color, if I just desaturate the image, all right, that's what I get. So there's no way for me to adjust these background tones. And if I go down in here into the HSL panel and play with the luminance, okay, so I know there's green in that background. See, nothing happens, okay? I can darken and brighten the yellow and the green, nothing happens. Okay, but if I go back up here and change this to Adobe Monochrome, so you want to make sure you're using Adobe Monochrome and not a camera monochrome, right? Because if you're using a camera monochrome, it's not going to give you this black and white panel, right? So let me just change it back here and pay attention to this panel here. So notice that the third panel down is called HSL Color. But when I change this to monochrome, Adobe Monochrome, now it says black and white, okay? Something else you'll notice is that I'm using what's called solo mode here in Lightroom. So if you want to get where as I open one panel, the other one closes, I do that because I'm working on a laptop and I don't want to have to scroll through like a whole bunch of panels. So in order to get that, just right-click anywhere on this panel and choose solo mode, right? And then you'll notice that all your panels collapse and only the one that you're working with is open at that time, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is set my white points. So I'm using Shift, double click, right? I'm actually going to go the other way on the blacks here, okay? So Shift, double click sets that white point. That's what I was talking about earlier. Then I'm going to go down here into this black and white panel. Now look what happens when I dial up and down the green. Okay, so even though this image is displaying in black and white, it knows, okay, Lightroom knows, where's my history here? It knows the original is color. And I think I have to reset my history state here. So let's do that. There we go. Okay, so now it knows that the original image is in color. Okay, so it's using that information when I pull down these sliders here. Okay, usually there's a lot of yellow in trees and grass as well, but you can see that yellow is also affecting the little owl. Okay, so if I want the owl lighter, I might want to keep yellow higher, versus if I want to bring his eyes out more, we can go darker. Okay. So I'm literally just playing with the sliders, okay? That brings out his eyes and his beak a bit more. Or I can also use this targeted tool here and go onto the rock. So it gives me this little crosshairs, right? So wherever you click and drag, you can see that that's affecting the yellow and the green slider. Okay, let's see what happens if I do his eye. Okay, that's orange and red as expected. Well, that kind of looks nice. So now his eyes and his beak really stand out. And the background is super dark. Let's bring maybe that up just a tiny little bit. Okay, do you see the difference? Right? I'm just going to make a quick virtual copy, and I'm going to undo this and go back to the original to show you the difference if I just desaturate, okay, and compare the two. So when you're dealing with monochrome, okay, the one on the left is the one I just did with the sliders because I have control of adjusting the tones, versus the one where I've desaturated on the right, I don't. Okay, so I've lost that ability to control the original colors. Okay. The only other thing I would do to this little guy is probably straighten it a little bit, because it looks like it's sort of sitting on the table, but it looks crooked to me. So let's just see if this will straighten it. I could use this little ruler tool. Right. It just feels straighter. Okay, so it's probably shot at an angle, but it just feels straighter to me. And I might use a graduated filter again from the bottom, and I'm going to gradate it quite, stretch it out so it's softer. And I'm going to bring down this darkness because I want to darken the table that he's sitting on. Okay, just like that. Okay, so there's our before and after. Quite a big difference between that and that. Okay. I've got another black and white image, and again, it was shot in color. Any questions about that black and white conversion? I know that's something that I get questions about a lot as well. And I'm going to reset this one because I'm going to do a few things to this image, including a perspective control. So I'm going to go again with Adobe Color here. And you'll notice that this one was set on black and white because that's what they had imported it. So I'm actually, the way that the person had shot it, okay, so when I brought it in was like so, and that was the camera black and white. Okay, so this one here does allow me to adjust things, but I want a color before image. Okay, I want to be able to toggle back and forth. So in order to do that, I just changed it to color, and then go over here in your history panel. So this is not something I've talked about a lot. Right click any of the states in the history panel, and you can choose to set that one as the before image. Okay, so if you want to compare your current state of the image to something that you did halfway through and see how you're doing, you can choose any of your history states as the before image. Okay, so what I want to do here is correct this distortion. Okay, so distortion happens when you're using a wide angle lens and looking up, particularly at a building. So you get this perspective distortion where the building looks like it's sort of converging, right? So it's called converging lines, right? So Rob says he learned something new. Didn't know you could do that with the history panel. I got a million tricks up my sleeve, right? Up here somewhere, right? So in here, when we're using the wide angle lens, there's a few things that I would do. Okay, so the first thing I would do is turn on enable profile corrections. Again, Lightroom is going to try and find the lens that you used, and if it doesn't have your profile for your lens, you can go and download it. Okay, so it recognized that this was a 10-20 Sigma lens. Okay, so if your lens is not in here, often what I try to do is find one that's similar. Okay, I had a Tamron lens that was never located in here, and I always just choose one that had a similar focal length. Okay, or you could go and download it from the lens manufacturer or Adobe's website and add that in. I also want to check on chromatic aberration, again, because this is a wide angle lens. I'm going to zoom in to 200% here. I'm looking for chromatic aberration on the edges, and actually there isn't a lot. So what chromatic aberration looks like is you'll see like a purple or a green fringe on the edge of things. And this one actually looks really good. So I'm really impressed with this lens. But I'm going to check it off anyways, just to make sure. Okay. So what it's doing with this lens correction profile is getting rid of any edge vignetting, because lenses have fall off to the edge. So often they're darker on the edge. So that profile correction is fixing that. And it's also correcting for some of the wide angle distortion. Okay. Now I could take it farther, okay, and distort it more, or correct more based on this, okay? So that's the first place I would go. Then the second place I would go is twofold. You can adjust. The church also looks like it's leaning to one direction. I'm going to crop this image anyways. So I'm going to enter the crop tool. And when you do so, I'm using the keyboard shortcut, which is R, right? Oops, right, R. And you can click auto right here. And it's going to try and straighten, okay, which it did. Right? That's one way to do it. Another way is what I did earlier with this little ruler. Okay, you can actually grab the ruler. And this wouldn't be my choice here in this image because there's nothing particularly straight that I can use, but you want to use something that is either straight up and down or straight across and sort of draw a line across it. Now, I don't want to use a line on the edge of the image like this pole here because with a wide lens, remember, it's going to distort. Okay, so I wouldn't want to do that either. So I'm going to use the auto, and looks like it did a pretty good job, right? Then I'm just going to get rid of this road over here. I don't need that. And I don't need this sign over here. We could clone it out, but I'm just going to crop it out because I really want to focus on the church itself, okay? And you don't need so much foreground. So when you have a lot of space in front of your subject like this, it feels like it's far away. So when we crop in more, right, does the church now suddenly feel closer? So it's still shot with that wide lens, so you still have the same perspective, but it feels closer now, right? The third way that you can correct your tilts and things are in the transform panel, okay? So transform is made for doing these things. So I can choose auto and see what it does, okay? So auto's done a few things. You notice that it straightens the tilt, but it also straightened the up and down, okay? Because if I open up my, crop tool again, look at the verticals on the edges of the church. So both walls and the steeple are perfectly up and down now, perfectly vertical, right? Versus if I turn this off, right? Can you see now that the church looks like it's sort of tilting and converging, right? So this auto has done a really good job of doing that, okay? Oops. If you end up cropping out some of the image, you may have to click this one to constrain if you run out of image, okay? Because it's going to try and correct that for you. Right. Another way to do it, and we get out of the crop tool here. Another way to do it is using full, okay? So we can just see what it's doing. Now it's doing left to right perspective control as well. So I'm not crazy about that one, right? We could try level, which will do just the tilt, or we could try vertical, which does the up and downs, right? And I'm going to turn it all the way off, right? And let's go back here to our straightening. Don't want to crop too much. Okay. And the last one I'm going to show you here is full guided. Sorry. Okay, so guided allows me to draw some lines. Okay, so you can see that I can line that up with the door. Right, and I'm going to do another one where I line that up on this door. Okay, and it's going to straighten those lines. You see how it did that? Let's try another one on here. Right, just like that. Okay, so guided, you can actually do horizontal as well. So I could do one here on the steeple, and it's going to correct things that way as well. Okay, so once you're done, oops. Just update it. Let's delete that one. Okay. There we go. So I think overall, the best one was the auto version here. It did a nice job out of the gate, and I find that it does, it does that most of the time, right? So if you are shooting buildings, there we go, and you're using a wide angle lens like this, we can use these tools to correct some of this perspective distortion, right? If I'm shooting street photography or candids, things like that. Honestly, I'm not that concerned about the buildings, and I wouldn't probably do this type of correction on a shot taken in the city if the buildings are secondary, okay? But in this case, where it's the church, Rob says it's crooked. Let's see. There, how's that? Does that look better? There we go. Right. In a building like this or a shot like this where it's the main feature, I would use those tone controls. Hey, Daniel. Hey. Welcome, Daniel Korzanowski from Miami. Daniel was one of my tour leaders when we were doing tours, and we're both itching to get out there again. So the last thing I'm going to do this one, again, is that monochrome treatment and change it into a black and white. Go down to the black and white panel, okay? And I'm going to use this targeted adjustment tool because I want to darken the sky and make it really dramatic. And I want to lighten the building. I could even darken the doors. Yeah, see, those are darkening as well. And maybe lighten the trees. So I could even create like a fake infrared look, making the trees lighter, right? So that's something that's very different in terms of creating a black and white look. So much more dramatic than the original. Lightroom has to catch up to me. Okay. Okay. One shooting tip I will give you, and this is an image by Danette. I know she sent in some images of food that I worked on a few weeks ago. One thing I will suggest if you're photographing buildings like this is to see a little bit more of the side. Okay, so see how we see a lot of this side of the building and only a tiny, maybe 5% of this side? Move yourself a little bit more to the corner of the building so that you see two sides, especially here because this side is in the shade, and that will actually create more of a three-dimensional feeling when you can capture two sides of the building like that. It'll make it seem a lot more three-dimensional. Okay? Linton says hi to Daniel. We were all in Vietnam about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. Okay? Can you do all that stuff in Luminar? Yes, you can for the most part. Let me do a quick edit on that for you. Let me copy this one. And I'm just going to reset it. Okay, so there's the original. And in this case, so remember how I showed earlier, I opened an edited version. This time I'm going to pull the raw file over so I have all that data. Okay, so I'm going to open the source file into Luminar. Okay, so it's going to find the raw file and open it. Yes, that is a great question. Welcome, Lynn. Where in Canada are you, Lynn? We've got a few Canadians. I'm here in Edmonton. Okay, Luminar is opening. While it's doing its thing, I'm just going to give you a quick little 5-second commercial here. Again, if you are working with a camera club, and Linton is here today, so he can attest to this. If you are a member of a camera club, I want to hear from you. All of the images that I'm working on today have been submitted by email or YouTube subscribers. We can do a dedicated session like this just for your camera club members. So I would need a minimum of 10 images to make it work. And all I need to know is who your camera club is, how many members you have, and who to get in touch with in regards to planning a date. So it would be regular, one of the Wednesday evenings that I do, no charge to your camera club, and all your camera club members would be exclusive to submitting your images, which would then be edited live on one of these same YouTube events. So if you are interested in doing that, just submit your information. Here, where are we here? Remember to subscribe to the channel as well. If you want to get in touch with me regarding your camera club, please use our contact form. If you could please post a link to our contact form in the chat, Rob, please. Thank you very much. And if you are a Lightroom user and you want more information on Luminar, if you use that link, you will get a $10 off discount if you use my link. All right. Mark's in Stony Plain. Awesome. You're just west of me and Gatineau, Quebec. Awesome. All right, where is my Luminar? Okay, here we go. It's open on the other screen again. Okay, so Nancy asked, can I do all those same things in Luminar? Yes, you can. And the reason I opened the original raw file is because when I have that raw file, you want to go down to this optics panel, Nancy, okay? And you'll see the chromatic aberration, the distortion correction, okay? And then you will see the defringe, okay? So you can also do some things with correcting the distortion, right? And under the crop tool, okay, this is where you'll actually find perspective control. Okay, so we can correct the tilt with this button here and correct the perspective with this button here. Let's see how we did. All right, let's see what Luminar thinks it wants to do as a composition. Okay, so notice how it cropped in quite a bit. I'm just going to go free form like I did on the other one. Okay, a little bit more on the top. You can see that it's corrected the tilt. Right, let's just see how that looks. Okay, there's our contact form link. Sorry about that. Yep, I got the screen layout. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to go back into composition, and then I'm going to click this one here because I want to see if it's going to correct that perspective up and down for me. Right? How does that look? Let me just adjust that a tiny bit. I think it was better before. So let me hit it on again. Wait a moment. There we go. Okay, so see, I'm looking at those lines on the edge. And as I grab the corner and click down, you'll see that more grid lines show up. Okay, so when the grid lines are there, I'm looking at the edges of the church on both sides. And now you can see that it is perfectly perpendicular as well. Okay, so right in here in these perspective tools, okay, that's where you're going to find that. And if it doesn't quite do the job, you can use these tools here to take it farther. Okay, so the vertical, and you'll see that I'm just taking this to extreme to show you what it does, okay, to correct some of the perspective control. So try the automatic ones first. And in this case, it did a good job and I didn't need to use those others. Okay. So in this case, I'm actually just going to escape out of this because I don't need to apply it again. So I hope that answers your question, Nancy, in terms of, yes, you can do the same thing in Luminar, right? We're coming up on an hour, and I've promised Chris to edit this image several times. So I mentioned last time I was going to do that here. Let me just start over again on this one. And this is obviously a street photography image or travel photography image. I know he travels a lot. Chris was with Ugo and I in Venice last year when we were doing the workshop there. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I know that Chris shoots Sony. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is go in and take a look at those camera profiles again. Okay, the image has a lot of contrast. There's a dark background behind her, and the onions in front of her are really bright. So I'm going to use that tone control again to try and bring more attention to her and see if I can't pick. Okay, so that light one looks actually pretty good. Might go a little bit less faded out, but light actually looks pretty good. I'm going to choose that one. Okay. I also am going to correct the tilt because these vertical lines behind her, okay, I'm going to try the auto on the crop tool. So all of the things we just did and applying to the building applies here as well. So anytime you have really strong horizontals or strong verticals, right, even in a portrait, you want to make sure that they look reasonably straight, right? I often will correct or tilt portraits on purpose, as long as I don't have a visible horizon in the background. Okay, if there's a horizon or something straight, you want to be careful of doing that. All right, so now I'm going to look for clipping. So there's nothing clipping here. Oh, maybe a tiny bit just on this little can there. So let's bring the highlights down. Right, and you can see that brought things down. But look what's happening. So when I did that, Okay, it actually took the highlights down on her face and made her look really muddy. Okay, so see when I take that really far, the onions look great, but she doesn't. Okay, so what does that tell me? Whenever you get that, it's a clue to go to a local adjustment instead. Okay, because these are all at the bottom, the easiest way for me to deal with that is going to be a graduated filter up from the bottom. Okay, I'm probably going to go even all the way up into her dress here. Okay, and you could see that my highlights were already down to 100. If it's not what you want here, just double click the word effect because it remembers what you did last time. And now I'm darkening those onions, but I'm also going to bring the exposure down because I want to darken the whole thing a little bit more. Okay, so I really want to draw attention to her. Now it's darkened her skirt a little bit too much. So I'm going to use that range mask again. Excuse me. Okay. Now it's coming off of there. And then I'm just going to use the brush and erase so that it's not on her skirt. There we go. Okay, so now you can see that it's applying to that bottom area. Okay, so a quick before. Look at the amount of contrast in the before image. After. If we do upside down again. Okay, before. So where does your eye go here? Okay. Yes, I'm coughing because there's forest fires and it's been really smoky and dry here. So I apologize. So where does your eye go here? Okay, so that's the before image. Okay, if your eye goes where my eye goes, it's up here to this pile of onions. Okay, then I go to the thing on her hair. Okay, oops. Now where does your eye go? Sorry, helps if I unmute myself. So what I'm doing is another radial filter. Okay, so I'm using the radial filter on her, and I'm going to make sure I invert it because I want it to be on the outside. Okay, and I'm going to darken. So this has gone too far, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. So that's gone a little too far. I don't want to bring the highlights down that much, and I don't want to bring the exposure down that much, but I just want to gently bring the eye into the middle onto her. Okay. Then I'm going to create a second one and put it just on her face. Okay. And by default, Lightroom puts it on the inside of the circle that you create. Okay. There's a lot of presets coming with Lightroom. You can choose dodge face. So we talked about dodge and burn earlier. So dodge is lighten, right? And I've edited the original Lightroom one to actually increase the contrast because I find that it just was increasing the shadows and the exposure, and it was making the image actually flat. So what I've done is I've increased the whites and the exposure as well as lowered the blacks. Okay, so see what my graduated or my radial filters are doing. See? So that's a really easy way to draw your eye in to a subject like this. So when you're shooting something on the street, you don't have ability to control the lighting or usually add flash or anything like that. So what you can do is tone control when you get into your editing software. Right? Thanks, Daniel. You should make some tutorials as well, Daniel. We miss your accent. Daniel's from Argentina. Awesome. I'm so glad, Nancy. That helps. All right. Well, I am dealing with a tickle in my throat today. So I apologize. I think we're going to have to end here today. I hope you've enjoyed our session. Do please, as Rob mentioned in the chat, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so we can keep doing videos like this and join us every week at the same time. See you next week.